Hello, Internet. It's hot as blazes where I live, so I have very narrow windows in which I can record in my car, and I usually have to find a shady patch to do it in. Can't do it too early because I don't have time. Can't do it too late because it's dark, and that doesn't look good. So I'm doing it in my house, probably for the rest of this series, because I hope to be done before summer. This video is going to be quite a bit longer. You see the time on this video. You also see the title. We are building a character. Now, if you've watched my video on layers, you're going to see a lot of familiar concepts. I talk a lot about this stuff in the layers video. And I'm going to be going through this not strictly in any particular order. It's in the order that I've written them down, which is kind of like it's pretty close to the order of importance. So like bigger layers into smaller layers. And the biggest layer, of course, is your class. Classes have two different categories that are assigned to them. One is your class's role, which is what you do, and the other is your power source, which is how you do it. What you do is going to be either defender, striker, leader, or controller. They do more or less what they say on the tin. Leader's a little bit tricky because that was a politically decided upon term, in that you are not a dedicated healer. You are a party support character. They called them leaders. There was a sort of negative stigma on the idea of being a support character in 3rd edition because you mostly kind of ended up being a heal bot. And they didn't want people to think that that's what a leader is. And indeed, that is not what they are. So they called them leaders instead. Defender, of course, defends your allies, usually by getting enemies to focus on themselves. Controllers put down area of effects and apply statuses on monsters. And then strikers do a ton of damage. Each of these roles can be done at melee or at ranged, although I think all defenders are melee. I think that's true. Actually, no, not all controllers are ranged. I was about to say all controllers are ranged, but that's not true, actually, because the druid can be a very effective melee controller. And there is, of course, some bleed over. Like the fighter is famously it's a striker pretending to be it's not pretending to be a defender, but it's a defender with a striker under the hood, because they do a lot. They can do a lot of damage if you build them right. So there's like most classes have a secondary role, even if the book does not explicitly call it out. In later books, they did start calling it out, like your primary role is this, but your secondary role is this. The earlier classes didn't get that treatment, but it's still true for them. It just wasn't something they officially recognized before. So you have your role and your power source, which is mostly narrative. There are a few things that do care about your power source, like there's some Paragon Paths and Epic Destinies that care about, like, if you are a martial character or an arcane character, etc. These things are mostly inconsequential. For the vast majority of players, you actually don't care what your power source is. It's all just narrative, and you can reflavor it as you wish, which is cool because flavor is actually free. So anyways, you have your class. Classes are going to determine your hit points, your number of healing surges, and your skill proficiencies. Your skill training. In addition to your like weapon and armor proficiencies and implement proficiencies and things like that. Defenders are, of course, going to have more hit points. Also, what I've noticed, this is not a strict rule, primal characters tend to have more hit points than their equivalents. Like, the barbarian is a striker that gets more hit points than any other striker. That kind of thing. The warden gets more hit points than I think any other class. I think the warden has the most hit points, and that's the primal defender. So anyways, there's trends, but these are not hard rules. Your hit points are going to be the base number of hit points that you see in the class, plus your constitution score, not your modifier, your score. And as you level up, the class tells you how many hit points you get at each level. This is not modified by constitution. You just get a flat number of hit points every level. If your constitution improves, you get that retroactively, but you don't apply your modifier per level. Healing surges. You get a certain number of healing surges per day as specified in your class. You'll be adding your constitution modifier to that for everyone except for the vampire. That is the number of times you can be healed by things that allow you to spend a healing surge, which is sort of like the standard way to be healed. And when you spend a healing surge, you get back 25% of your max health. I'll be going into why that is such a good thing in a later video, but suffice it to say, more healing surges extends the amount of punishment that you can take over the course of an adventuring day. So it is not even really that much based on your hit points, although having more hit points does also improve your healing surge value. So it makes you more efficient to heal, which is super cool. I'll be getting more into that in a future video. I'm not sure exactly which one. I'm looking at my notes. But after hit points and healing surges, your class also tells you which skills you are trained in. Now, here's a really cool thing, and something that I think it took me a couple of years in 5th edition, or into the run of 5th edition, before I realized that it didn't do this, because I'm mostly in a DM perspective. Most classes, if there is a skill that is sort of central to the class, Arcana for the wizard or the sorcerer, religion for the cleric, etc., you get that automatically. That's free and frankly mandatory. You have to take those skills. You get those skills automatically, in addition to the other skills that you are picking from a list. Being trained in a skill gives you a +5 bonus to the skill. That's it. And there's actually, that's not it. I have just lied to you. Haha, I was making sure you were paying attention. No, there are some things that you can only do with skills if you are trained in them. For example, I don't want to mislead you, but let me bring up my book here and see if I can find an example of a skill. I am not wasting time. I'm not stalling. Okay, here we go. I had this ready, of course. If I go up here, I want to say that there is like an Arcana one. Yeah, so Arcana is your magic skill, and Detect Magic is actually not a spell in 4th edition. It is something anyone who is trained in Arcana can do. You sort of like sense magical effects in the area with an Arcana check, but you have to be trained to do it. Not just anyone can do it. So there are a few things in the skills section that says like trained only, and then you have to be trained in a skill to do that. But the base effect of being trained is that you get a +5 bonus. You get your ability score to skills. You also get half your level added to skill checks. And I went over this in the previous video in the series. Skill checks and ability checks are different, but that's largely just a naming thing. There aren't any things that are like it's an ability check unless you're proficient in a skill. Like they're fully separate things and they never interact. You always add half your level to skill checks and ability checks, in addition to any other miscellaneous bonuses that apply. So that's classes. Classes will also they'll give you a bunch of features at level 1. Obviously, different classes give you different amounts of features. I can't really go into the specifics because there's so many classes to talk about. 4th edition has just a wealth of classes. If you know what kind of role you want to play, you can pick a class that does that role in like 6 different ways. Or you can pick from different classes that do that role in 6 different ways. In addition to that, you get your armor proficiencies. Here's a fun thing. There are several different kinds of armor. Every type of armor has its own proficiency. And they always go sequential. So you go from like cloth to leather to hide, etc., all the way up to plate proficiency. You have a, -2, -4 penalty to attack rolls if you're wearing armor you're not proficient in. It's something like that. And that's all attack rolls. Doesn't matter if it's a spell or a martial ability, anything. You are really bad at fighting in armor that you're not proficient in. That's how it goes. But getting proficient in armor is not that difficult, especially if you already have some investment in strength, because I think the higher levels of armor require strength to be proficient in them, unless your class gives it to you, obviously. Light armor, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. I'll go ahead and talk about armor. Light armor lets you add either your Dex or Intelligence modifier to your AC in addition to what the armor gives you. Heavy armor does not. It gives you a flat amount. So heavy armor is better for people with lower Dex. Light armor is better for people with high Dex, especially if your class actually improves Dex or Intelligence. Actually, man, the habits that 5th edition puts into you. Dex or Intelligence, either one can add to AC. If you are a class that improves either of those two stats, there isn't really much reason to invest in heavier armor. You might get some better light armor that you start out with, but that's about it. It also gives you weapon proficiencies, which allow you to add the weapon's proficiency bonus. Every weapon has a proficiency bonus listed. It's either a +2 or a +3. In addition, you might gain proficiency in certain implements. Now, implements are things like wands, staves, orbs, tomes, holy symbols, key focuses. They are the things that you're doing implement powers with. These are attack powers that don't use a weapon. They're aside from racial abilities, any class attack power that doesn't use a weapon is going to use your implement instead. But you have to be proficient in an implement to use it at all, as opposed to a weapon, which just gives you the proficiency bonus. Let me just burp right in the middle of that sentence. So those are the things that your base class gives you. In addition to your class, you are going to be choosing a race. Races, classically, humans, elves, dwarves, half-elves, half-orcs, everything like that. 4th edition has a ton of races. You're going to be picking your race. Your race is going to give you some bonuses to ability scores, as usual, as you would expect. Most races give you +2 to 2 different stats. In the later part of 4th edition's run, you started getting races that would give you +2 to 1 stat, and then your choice of +2 to 2 different stats. And then humans get +2 to any single stat that you want. Races also give you usually 2 different skill bonuses, and maybe some other 1 or 2 other miscellaneous bonuses, and then a racial power, which is usable either at will, once per encounter, once per day. Actually, I'm not sure if there are any daily racial powers. I think it's all either at will or encounter. There are exceptions to this, of course. Humans don't get a racial power, but they do give you an extra at-will power from your own class. Half-elves get an extra at-will power from a different class that you can use once per encounter. That's really cool. Dwarves also, interestingly, don't get a racial power, but they can use Second Wind as a minor action instead of the normal standard action. I'll be getting the Second Wind when I talk about combat, and let me tell you, it's worth it. That's one of the strongest racial traits in the game, in my opinion. So, yeah, dwarves are actually super cool in 4th edition. Man, should I do a whole video on my favorite 4th edition races? I might end up doing that. Dwarves are going to be in the top 3 easy. So anyways, races is going to give you ability bonuses, they're going to give you skill bonuses, they're going to give you powers, and they usually give you 1 or 2 additional features on top of that. These sort of minor side features. Like Dragonborn get elemental resistance to whatever type of damage type their breath weapon is, and they get +1 to attacks when they are at half health or lower, which is called Bloodied in this edition. Lots of people use Bloodied. I don't know why I'm explaining that. Even if you've only ever played 5th edition, you probably know what Bloodied is. People use that all the time. That came in 4th edition. After race and class, then you would do your ability score assignment, either point buy or rolling or whatever you're going to do, because now you know what ability scores you want, which ones are good for your class. Because a lot of classes also have a choice at first level. You get a feature where you choose between these 2 different things. Or more if you have expansion books, and that will help determine what your secondary ability score is. So that can happen. So you definitely want to figure out what class and what specialization you are playing before you assign your ability scores. There are 2 optional layers when you are building a character: background and theme. Background is very minor. Backgrounds were introduced in the second player's handbook. And basically what it boils down to is there's going to be a list of... These are for standard backgrounds. There's campaign setting specific backgrounds. I'm not going to get into that, mainly because I'm not familiar with it, and also because it wasn't really standard in my experience. But a standard background is going to have a list of skills, usually 3 or 4 skills, or 2 to 4 skills. And you're going to choose one of those skills and either get a +2 bonus in that skill or add the skill to your class's list of trainable skills. So if it's something you couldn't normally choose to be trained in, now you can, but it still takes up one of your skill training options. I like this because it allows characters to diversify a little bit. I use backgrounds in my games. I always say, like, okay, backgrounds are on. Don't pick from a list of backgrounds because that is needlessly complicated and you might feel restricted. Like, oh, I want my guy to be educated, so I have to take a background that reflects education, but that means I have to pick from I have to go like find the list, find a skill that is appropriate. Forget all that. Just come up with a background of your own. You can call it something if you want. Pick a skill that is appropriate to your character concept and either add it to your class skill list or get a +2 in it, your choice. Like, I don't sweat it too much. It's a very, very minor benefit. And I'm cool with just sort of hand waving it. The other thing is themes. Now, themes take a few different approaches, and I want to say that they were sort of redesigned halfway through their run. Themes have powers that can replace your class powers as you level up, and they also have features that sort of kick in at levels 5, 10, 15, and 20. Mostly, like, I don't do themes from the books. I make up themes when I'm running a game, I make up themes for my players that are built around like what their character concept is mechanically and also reflect their background and what their personal philosophy is. And that's kind of what a theme is supposed to do. But themes are an additional optional layer. You don't have to use them in your campaign. And it's honestly usually fine if some people have themes and others don't. Because most of the content of a theme is replacing what you would normally have gotten for leveling up in a class. Like, instead of taking a class power, I'm going to take a power from my theme of the same level. So, like, you aren't actually getting more powerful, you are just sort of diversifying where you are getting your features from. So it's usually fine. Themes are relatively minor, although they are a bigger impact than backgrounds. In addition, at first level, you're going to get a feat. Maybe more than one if you're human. Humans are real good. You are going to get a feat. There's thousands of feats. There's so many feats. So here's the thing about feats in 4th edition. You get a feat at 1st level, 11th level, and 21st level, the beginning of every tier. And you get a feat at every even level. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, etc. You know what even numbers are. So you're going to end up getting, over the course of 30 levels, you're going to be getting 18 feats. Half your levels plus one at the start of every tier. 18 feats. That's a lot of feats. As a 5th edition player coming into 4th edition, you're going to find that feats are relatively minor. They're pretty small, usually no more than like 1 line, maybe 2. Not this whole paragraph with like bullet points of what you get. That's because they are individually a much smaller portion of your overall kit. But you're going to get one at 1st level, and you should expect to get more pretty quickly. In addition to the feats, you're going to start with some gear. 4th edition doesn't have like packages of gear for classes and backgrounds. What it does is it says you have 100 gold, spend it how you want. So you go over to the equipment section and you find 100 gold worth of material of weapons and armor and adventuring gear. You add that in. Anything left over, you have as money. Easy peasy. And the cool thing is that item prices are set such that, like, they're set with the assumption that you as a starting adventurer should be able to afford everything you need. So like a set of plate armor is 50 gold, not 1,500. It's 50 gold because a paladin who is proficient in plate armor should be able to start in plate armor. It's part of their class. Why not let them use that? It's mundane equipment. The rules for starting at higher level actually say you can have whatever mundane equipment you want, because by the time, even in very early heroic tier, the money value of this stuff is so low it's not worth tracking. So at character creation, 1st level, you're going to get your mundane gear. You might, if you have very little else, you might be able to afford 1 healing potion. I think healing potions are also 50 gold. So like if you get very little else, you might be able to start with a healing potion. You won't be able to afford any magical gear at low levels, although magical gear is in the player's handbook, which is something that you might not expect as a 5th edition player. And that is because if you've seen my videos on the magic item problem in 5th edition, you will know 4th edition, a lot like picking magic items is part of your build. You're kind of assumed to have access to magic items of your level and lower, sort of at your will. As long as you can afford it, you can either buy it or craft it, however it is that you acquire magic items. And that is in addition to the higher level magic items that you find, because you usually find magic items of higher level than yourself. But you won't have any of that at character creation. We're talking about building a character right now, so that doesn't really apply. And finally, you're going to pick some powers. Actually, you'll probably want to do this before you pick your gear. I think I usually do gear last. For some reason, I have it higher in my list, so that's why I did gear first. Your powers are broken down into 4 different types. You have at-will powers, which you can do as often as you have actions to use them. You have encounter powers that once used, you must rest for 5 minutes. It's a 5-minute short rest in 4th edition. It's kind of assumed that you take a short rest after every encounter. So after every sort of like major scene where you might expend resources, you're kind of assumed to take a 5-minute breather and recover all of your encounter powers. So you'll have them again for the next encounter. And then you have daily powers, which recharge on a long rest. A long rest being 6 hours. And you can only take 1 long rest per 24 hours. So you have at will, encounter, and daily powers. And those are the recharge rates. Your powers in your class also have a 4th category, which is utility powers, because the at-will, encounter, and daily powers are attack powers. Those are specifically attack powers. They are going to do damage to the enemy. And then you have utility powers that don't do direct damage to the enemy. Though they might, they don't, like, that's not their primary thing. They're usually defensive, mobility. Some of them are for, like, enhancing skill checks. These sort of like miscellaneous catch-all, not directly offensive abilities. And utility powers can be at-will, encounter, or daily powers. But they are sort of separated from the attack powers. So they're just called, they're collectively called utility powers. Powers, and I do want to get into how powers work, but I'm going to need props. I'm going to need a book to sort of like go over the anatomy of the power. And I want to talk about like keywords and how the power is structured. But real quick, the powers are going to have a few specific keywords. They're going to have a keyword that tells you what power source they come from, if any. So if they're from a class, they're going to have a power source. And that will be martial, arcane, divine, etc. And that is important for certain magic items or feats that might apply only to powers from a certain power source. They're going to have, if they are an attack power, if they involve an attack roll at all, they're going to have either a weapon keyword or an implement keyword. There are a few racial attack powers. What comes to mind is the Minotaur has like a charge attack. The Dragonborn has a breath attack. These do attack rolls, but they don't have weapon or implement keywords because they are racial abilities. And the races don't know what, if you are going to be a weapon user or an implement user. So what they do instead is they just put the bonuses that you would normally expect from a magic weapon or a magic implement, and they build it into the attack roll by default. So they're usually considered not quite as good as an actual weapon encounter, weapon power or implement power, because although you're getting the assumed bonuses, but you're not getting any of the other features, the traits or the powers that come with magic items. But if you have if your power says a weapon in the keywords, then you can use a weapon with that. You get the proficiency bonus on the attack rolls. If it's a magic weapon, you get the enhancement bonus to your attack rolls and your damage rolls. If it has traits, it applies to this attack, etc. And the same thing with the implement. So if you have a staff and you're able to use staffs as an implement, you get to use your magic staff qualities on that attack. And then the other keywords largely refer to the effect of the power. So if it does a particular damage type, it's going to have that damage type as a keyword. If it is a fear effect, it's going to say fear. If it creates an object that like lasts on the battlefield, it'll say conjuration. If it summons a creature onto the battlefield, it'll say summon. If it creates an area of effect that sticks around for a little while, it's going to say zone. If it teleports something, it'll say teleport or teleportation. Some of these keywords have built-in rules, some don't. A lot of them are pretty intuitive. So like the teleportation keyword has a few rules in place. You have to teleport to somewhere that you can see, for example. So you can't teleport behind a solid wall that you can't see through. Easy enough. Some of them are a little bit more complicated, like the summoning rules. Summoning takes up, half a page of rules because it's kind of complicated. It's kind of involved. There's a lot of information that needs to be baked into that in order for summoning powers to be as simple and concise as they are. So that is keywords. I think that amount of information would be enough to get you through character creation. At character creation, you're going to get 2 at-will powers. This is default. There might be exceptions. You're going to get 2 at-will powers, 1 encounter attack power, and 1 daily attack power. You don't have any utility powers at level 1. You get that first at level 2. And then basically every time you level up, you look in your class section, and if your class has a set of powers at the level that you are now gaining, you can take a power of that level or lower of the same type. So like, for example, at level 3, you get another encounter attack power. You could instead take a level 1 encounter attack power, but you can't take a level 1 daily attack power in its place. It has to be of the same type. Also, retraining. We might as well do retraining. I'm talking a little bit about leveling up. Every time you level up, you may retrain one thing, be it a trained skill, a power selection, or a feat. Every time you level up, you can change one of those things. So if you decide, like, I'm going to take this power, actually, this power doesn't work the way that I kind of was imagining it. It's not as effective as I like. It's not really jiving with my character concept. I don't like it anymore. I'm going to trade it out for something else of the same level and type. So that's the retraining rules, real quick. And that is baked into every character. You don't need extra rules on your class to say that when you level up, you can swap these things out. That's just baseline for everybody. So that is character creation. You pick your class, you pick your race, you assign your ability scores, you get your background and your theme if you're doing those. Those are optional. You pick 1 feat at level 1, you get your gear, 100 gold's worth, and you pick your powers, 2 at-wills, 1 encounter, 1 daily. And then you have your character. That's character creation in 4th edition. It's pretty straightforward, to be honest. Your first time doing it might take a while because there's a lot of options. So here's what I recommend. If you are just getting started in 4th edition as a 5th edition player, you're going to get blown away by the amount of options. There's thousands of feats, dozens of classes. How do you pick? You limit your options to start with. Don't go on the 4th edition database website and look up all the feats that you qualify for. Don't do that. Use the player's handbooks, 1, 2, and 3, because they have general feats in those. So regardless of which book your class is coming out of, use all 3 of those. And then use the power books that are appropriate for your character. So if you are a martial character, your martial power 1 and 2. If you're a divine character, divine power, etc. Use those for powers and feats and for other class options that might be in those. Because they do sometimes have alternate class options where you switch out a class feature for a different one. And then you don't need to worry about magic items at level 1. So I recommend just using the player's handbook for your items. For feats, just stick to those books. You don't need every book. Use the book that your character class came out of, plus the player's handbooks if you didn't come from one of those, and then the power book appropriate for your power source. And I would stick with just those, and that should limit your options pretty well, so that you don't spend 8 hours pouring through options to decide which one's best. And also, like, it's not that big a deal, honestly. Like, it's hard to mess up a character at level 1. Just your baseline, like randomly picking options would kind of get you there. to be honest. Like, you're still going to be mostly functional. Don't randomly pick options. It's not great. Building your character on purpose and finding synergies and strategies, and also talk to the other players at your table while you're building characters so that you can be like, oh, you can do that? Well, I can do this, and that works really well with that. So I'm going to take this power instead so that I can, play off of what you're doing. That's great. Team play. My party did that in the last campaign that I ran, and it was so gratifying to watch it happen in real time. It was so good. So yeah, that's how to build a character in 4th edition. It's pretty simple. Your first time doing it would probably take, I'd expect maybe 30, 45 minutes. But once you've done it a couple of times, you can get that time down to like 10, 15 minutes. Pretty easy, especially if you're doing a character class you've done before. Yeah. So it's simple, but there's a lot of options to choose from. So I think keeping those options limited for your first time doing it would be pretty important. And that's how to build a character.